The Clockwork Labyrinth. Pomni sat alone on one of the circus benches, staring up at the vast, swirling sky. It was another strange day in the digital circus, and although she was used to the never-ending oddities, today felt different. She couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. The vibrant colors of the circus almost seemed to dull, and a cold wind blew through the tent flaps, chilling her to the bone. "Pomni, come on. We've got something interesting over here," Ragatha called from across the grounds. She stood with Kinger and Zubul, pointing toward one of the older, more dilapidated tents near the edge of the circus. Pomni got up and hurried over. Curiosity piqued. As she approached, she saw that the tent was not one she'd noticed before. Its faded canvas was torn and covered in strange mechanical gears that clicked and whirred quietly. At the entrance, a large rusty clock hung, its hands spinning wildly in opposite directions. "What is this place?" Pomni asked, feeling a sense of unease. "No idea," Zubul replied with a shrug, "but it looks new. Well, new to us anyway." Kinger muttered something under his breath, his eyes wide with suspicion. This doesn't feel right. We should leave it alone." But before anyone could respond, Jack strolled up behind them, a wide grin on his face. "What's wrong? Scared of a little clock?" he teased, pushing past them and into the tent without hesitation. "Jax, wait!" Ragatha called, but it was too late. The moment Jax crossed the threshold, the tent's gears began to grind louder, and the clock at the entrance stopped spinning. The tent flap fluttered shut behind him. Pomni's heart skipped a beat. What just happened? Without thinking, she stepped forward and reached for the flap. But as soon as her fingers brushed the fabric, the world seemed to shift. The ground beneath her feet gave way, and she felt herself falling. Down, down, down into darkness. The clockwork maze. When Pomni opened her eyes, she was no longer in the circus. Instead, she stood in the middle of a massive, mechanical labyrinth. Towering walls of metal and brass surrounded her, the air thick with the scent of oil and machinery. The gears and cogs that made up the walls clicked rhythmically, the sound echoing through the maze like a heartbeat. She wasn't alone. Ragatha, Zubul, and Kinger were there too, looking just as disoriented. "What is this place?" Ragatha asked, her voice shaky. "I think we've fallen into some kind of trap," Pomni muttered. "But where's Jax?" As if in answer, a loud clang rang out, followed by Jax's unmistakable voice. "Over here, losers!" They followed the sound through the twisting corridors, eventually finding Jax leaning casually against one of the walls, smirking. "Took you long enough." "Do you even know where we are?" Ragatha demanded, her hands on her hips. Jax shrugged. "Not a clue, but I've got a feeling there's a way out somewhere." Pomni glanced around, her stomach churning. "We need to stick together. This place, it feels alive." As they began to explore, they quickly realized the labyrinth was not just a maze. It was a puzzle. Some paths would open and close on their own, gears grinding loudly as walls shifted. Other corridors seemed to stretch on forever, looping back on themselves in impossible ways. Kinger was growing increasingly frantic, muttering to himself about traps and conspiracies. Zubul seemed calm, but kept a wary eye on the ever-changing environment. Ragatha tried to keep everyone focused, but the constant shifting of the maze was wearing on her too. Then, they encountered their first real obstacle, a large room filled with mechanical platforms, each one rotating at different speeds. Suspended above the platforms was a glowing orb, pulsing with energy. "Looks like we need that," Jack said, pointing to the orb. "Probably opens the next door." "Great," Zubul muttered. "Another game." Pomni stepped forward, eyeing the platforms carefully. "We'll have to jump across." One by one, they leaped onto the platforms. timing their jumps with the rotations. Ragatha was the first to reach the orb, grabbing it just as one of the platforms spun too quickly beneath her. She lost her footing, but before she could fall, Pomni reached out and pulled her to safety. With the orb in hand, the door at the far end of the room creaked open, revealing yet another twisting corridor. One step closer, Pomni muttered under her breath, "The heart of the maze." As they ventured deeper into the labyrinth, the maze became more complex. The walls hummed with energy, and the gears turned faster, almost as if the entire structure was speeding up. Jax, usually so confident, started to seem uneasy, though he hid it behind his usual sarcasm. "Anybody else feel like this place is trying to eat us?" Zubul muttered, ducking as a low-hanging gear spun dangerously close to her head. "It's definitely not friendly," Ragatha agreed. Then they reached the heart of the labyrinth. It was a massive circular chamber, its ceiling disappearing into darkness. In the center stood a giant, ancient clock, its face cracked and its hands frozen at midnight. Surrounding it were intricate gears and cogs, each one connected to the clock, ticking slowly, as if counting down to something. At the base of the clock was an inscription, written in a language none of them recognized. But as Pomni stared at it, the letters seemed to shift, rearranging themselves into words she could understand. "To leave, you must turn back time." "Turn back time?" Pomni whispered, her brow furrowing. Before anyone could respond, the ground beneath them trembled. The clock's hands began to move, ticking backward at an alarming speed. The maze outside the chamber groaned and shifted, the walls folding in on themselves as the entire structure began to collapse. "We need to get out of here," Kinger yelled, panic setting in. "But how?" Ragatha asked, her eyes wide. Pomni looked up at the clock, horsey, her mind racing. "We have to stop the clock. Turn it back." Without waiting for a response, she sprinted toward the base of the clock, searching for a way to interact with it. The others followed, but the room was falling apart around them. Gears crashed down from above, and the walls of the chamber began to cave in. Jack spotted a lever near the base of the clock and pulled it with all his strength. The clock's hands slowed, but only for a moment before speeding up again. "It's not working," Jax growled. "Together," Pomni shouted. "We all have to pull." One by one, they each grabbed hold of the lever, pulling it with all their might. The clock resisted, but slowly, its hands began to move backward, ticking more slowly until, finally, they stopped at exactly midnight. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a deafening clang, the clock's face shattered, and the labyrinth collapsed entirely, sending them all tumbling into darkness. Return to the circus. When Pomni opened her eyes again, she was back in the circus, lying on the ground near the same old tent. The others were there too, groaning as they sat up, disoriented. Did we make it out?" Ragatha asked, looking around in disbelief. Pomni nodded, her body still aching from the fall. "I think so." The tent that had swallowed them was gone, replaced by the familiar chaos of the digital circus. But something had changed. Pomni could feel it. The maze, the clock. It had been real, but they had beaten it. They had turned back time. Jack stood up, dusting himself off. "Well, that was fun. Let's never do that again." Pomni chuckled, despite the exhaustion weighing her down. "Agreed." But as they walked back toward the main part of the circus, Pomni glanced over her shoulder. The gears of the clockwork maze were gone, but the feeling that something had shifted remained. For now, they were safe. But the digital circus was full of mysteries, and she knew it wouldn't be long before they faced another challenge, one even more dangerous than the last. Jax's new toy. It had been a quiet day in the digital circus. Well, as quiet as it could get. considering the ever-shifting landscape and bizarre antics of its inhabitants. Jax was bored, which meant trouble for everyone else. He was wandering aimlessly when he noticed something he hadn't seen before. Tucked away behind a particularly garish stall was a small, nondescript door. Jax grinned. A hidden room? That sounded like fun. Without hesitation, he opened the door and stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, filled with strange mechanical gadgets and gizmos. In the center of the room, on a dusty pedestal, sat a small, ornate box. Jax's eyes gleamed with mischief. "Ooh, what do we have here?" he muttered to himself, picking up the box. It was intricately designed, with strange symbols etched into its surface. There was a keyhole, but no key in sight. "Well, well, well," Jax chuckled. "I bet this does something interesting." He shook the box a little, but nothing happened. Then he tried prying it open, but it wouldn't budge. Frustrated, Jax slammed the box against the pedestal. Suddenly, the symbols on the box glowed, and with a soft click, it opened. A cloud of green mist poured out, swirling around Jax before dispersing into the air. For a moment, nothing happened. Jax blinked, waiting for some grand explosion or magical effect. But everything remained still. Lame, he muttered, tossing the box aside. As he turned to leave, he heard a soft, eerie giggle. Jax froze. The giggle grew louder, echoing through the room. He spun around, but there was no one there. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Okay, who's messing with me?" Jax called out, eyes narrowing. The giggle turned into full-blown laughter, sinister and mocking. Jax backed away, suddenly uneasy. He bolted out of the room, slamming the door behind him. But the laughter followed him. The puzzle cube. Cain had set up a new challenge in the digital circus, a massive puzzle cube that floated ominously in the center of the grounds. It had hundreds of moving parts, and the challenge was simple. Solve it to win a prize. The problem? No one had any idea how it worked. "All right, who's ready for the cube of conundrums?" Cain asked, floating excitedly above the puzzle. Jax rolled his eyes. "It's just a big block of nonsense. You're really running out of ideas, aren't you?" "Oh, ye of little faith!" Cain twirled in midair. "This is more than just a block. It's a test of wit, strategy, and patience." Pomni, always eager to escape the madness of the circus, stepped up. "I'll give it a shot." Ragatha nodded in support. "We'll figure it out together." As the two approached the cube, they noticed its surface shifting and changing. Symbols lit up and faded, while panels moved of their own accord. Cain watched with glee as Pomni hesitantly placed her hand on the puzzle. The cube immediately responded, rotating faster and faster. Pomni jumped back. "What did I do?" Jax, watching from a distance, chuckled. "Nice going." Suddenly, the cube split into several smaller cubes, each floating around the digital circus. "Oh dear," Cain said, rubbing his hands together. "Now it's really a puzzle." "Great," Pomni muttered, chasing after one of the floating cubes. For hours, Pomni and Ragatha tried to catch the moving pieces, only for them to dodge and weave out of reach. Jax, of course, sat on the sidelines, amused by their struggle. Finally, Pomni managed to grab hold of one of the pieces. As soon as she did, the rest of the cubes zoomed back, reassembling themselves into the original cube. The puzzle flashed once and then fell silent. "I did it?" Pomni asked, confused. Cain floated down, a sly grin on his face. "Well, sort of. The real challenge was letting the cube come to you. But don't worry, you still win." Pomni sighed, too tired to question it. "I don't even want to know what the prize is." With a snap of his fingers, Kane conjured a small digital pet, a floating, blinking ball of light. Enjoy! Jax burst out laughing. All that work for a glowing ping-pong ball? Pomni groaned. Just another day in the circus, I guess.